So there's a lot of different learning disabilities. I am using dyslexia as my example, not because it is the only one, but because it is hereditary, which means it runs in families, which means that every single person in my father's family has it. I have it. So it happens to be the one I know the best. And it's also actually fairly common. What is dyslexia? It is neurological and hereditary, has nothing to do with intelligence. It does have some kind of, it has implications throughout people's lives, so it actually has correlations to depression. And of course, it is incredibly varied. So every person is affected slightly differently. Every person's dyslexia is different. Every dyslexic is different. Next slide, since I don't think it likes me. Next slide. And why am I using this as my poster child, aside from the fact that I know it really well? We're everywhere. Between 10 and 20% of the world's population is probably dyslexic. The numbers are kind of wishy-washy and depends on who you're reading. But we don't exist in library and information science literature to such an extent that I was actually really surprised. And I was profoundly alienated in a few classes when I found out just how much I didn't exist. Next slide. So why should we care, aside from the fact that it is alienating to not exist? Not that long ago, when his siblings were in school, being a dyslexic child meant you were the bad child. We're not bad. We just learn differently. And when there's no mention of the way we learn or the manners in which we can be assisted, we are doing everybody a disservice, because how can we serve the next generation of students with dyslexia or people with dyslexia if we can't help others understand what it actually is? And of course, since it affects mental health as well, we're kind of messing up a lot of people, a lot more than we probably want to. Next slide. So we need to bring it into the LIS classroom. Next slide. For people who actually are dyslexic in the classroom, there's some really simple things like font. Please don't use italic, it's evil. Be open to assistive technologies. So a lot of us use something. And remember that not everyone's going to talk about it because there's still a lot of stigma. Next slide. But we also need to teach tomorrow's librarians, because as I said, if they don't know, they're not going to be able to adequately serve tomorrow's dyslexics. So I have not really heard mention in most of my classes of the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is incredibly strange to me because it's kind of important for a lot of people, a lot of different things. So we should at least be bringing this into the classroom. We should remember that, the crazy fun fonts might be really fun, but they might also be impossible to read. We should remember that universal design is helpful, and that a lot of dyslexics, because it's an auditory, it affects both auditory and written language. So a lot of us can't actually separate background noise from what we're supposed to be listening to or paying attention to, which means that we need a quiet place to study. Next slide. Luckily, most of these things actually have something in common. They're helpful for everybody, not just for those of us who are dyslexic. Next slide. So, one of the great things about this, it's never going anywhere. We're not going to be cured. There's no way to change our brain structures. They're just the way they are. But if we all work together, if we incorporate the existence of this into our curricula, if we make sure that people actually know there's such a thing and know something about accommodations, we can move forward to something that will serve all of us, I think, a whole lot better. Next slide. I have about 20 pages of bibliography if anyone is more interested in more. This is a very selected list. Next slide. And thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. Does anyone have more questions for Caitlin regarding incorporating the ADA into LIS classrooms or dyslexia in libraries? Someone online
Christina
does.
has a question.
Okay, Christina, go ahead.
This isn't really a question, I guess, but I like that you talked about like the secretive students or people who have dyslexia who won't say anything, and I think that's true with a lot of needs, especially like a lot of like those invisible disabilities that you can't see, and so it's hard to tell that they're there, and I think that's really important to keep in mind, is that that we need to try to reach out to, especially to the groups that won't, that don't speak out about what they need, and I think that was really important to note. So thank you.
No problem, and I'm going to be honest. Until about last year, I was one of the people who never said anything. So I know how the temptation is, I have figured out how to mostly make it, so I'm not going to say anything because I don't want people to look at me strangely. And it continues.
Thank you for that comment, Christina, and thank you, Caitlin. I think it's really brave of you to come up here and give this presentation, and I really respect that you're doing this here today in front of your colleagues. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for Caitlin?
I have a question. So you said that you just sort of revealed this last year. What made you feel like it was safe? Because I feel like that's what we need to be doing more. So what was it for you?
I think it was actually sort of a double thing. Part of it was just anger. I was really, really angry that there was simply, I was in a youth services class in which I found out that apparently everyone learned to read at like 2 or 3 years old. And I sure didn't. And it was just so alienating to sit there and find out that, everybody did this thing, not me. And I thought, I've also been watching as my father and his brothers age and have problems that are the results of never having had help. But at the same time, I have a safety insofar as I have a double major from undergrad. I have a master's from the Spanish program here, so I can say I have this legitimacy that I can drag up. And so I think in terms of safety, that was probably that, and then the fact that I had friends who knew that I was competent was probably the biggest thing. So not really, I don't really think it was as much in the class, which is kind of unfortunate. But yeah, that I guess I felt like I have a master's in something else. I have these other things, so I can say I have this problem. Like, gee, when I get tired, I can't understand what I'm reading anymore at all. And I still have legitimacy as a scholar. Which is the fear of delegitimizing oneself is very scary.
All right, Margaret from Syracuse has a question.
Okay. Go ahead, Margaret.
Okay, it looks like she typed it out,
Okay.
so let me... Okay, she says, great presentation. I just wanted to comment and say the fact that these measures benefit wider populations, as someone who's encountered extremely noise-sensitive students, for example, is a fabulous observation that makes them feel even more applicable and easier to, shall we say, market to libraries that don't currently think about those invisible disabilities.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons and thank you for that. That's one of the reasons I try to stress the fact that it's helpful for everybody. So, clear fonts are great for people whose eyes aren't so good. And quiet spaces are good for a lot of us. So it makes it easier to sell your director. You're not just doing it for like 10% of the population.
Yeah. I just want to say I think I'm really, really excited that this presentation was incorporated into the symposium. I think that a lot of the time disability and learning difference do get overlooked in the diversity conversation. So I hope that we can all continue talking about this as we move into lunch and throughout the day. So thank you so much, Caitlin. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Thank you.
To all our presenters.